Wafube. This is Misal Bay, aka Warlock Asylum, coming at you with another episode of Raw Talk. And today we're continuing uh, our Simon Necronomicon series. And this will be the Simon Necronomicon Lesson 2. Is the Simon Necronomicon a book of light? And that's an interesting subject, especially for people who are interested in the tone. Sometimes we hear different things. Sometimes the Necronomicon is called a black book. Sometimes, let me just adjust this light right quick. Sometimes we also hear that the Simon Necronomicon is a book of light by those who work with it. Personally, before we begin the discussion or going further deeper into it, I can say that from my experience, um, it's definitely a force that has sort of an alien, for lack of a better word, characteristic. However, I know like in working with it with different people, that some of the people who were having problems in their life, like with negative energies, all those things left when they began working with the tone. And most of the stuff that's in the neck is really based a lot on banishings, exorcisms, and just harnessing planetary energy. However, like in its conception, what is it really? You know what I'm saying? And why would questions like these come up? I'm sure you may have heard questions like these, so it's a good time to look into why they came up. One thing that is sort in the Necronomicon, and I've kind of come to see this as a reality, but not in the way it's proposed in the text itself, but understanding that what the Simon Tome says is to be taken metaphorically. And what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna share my screen again, but I'm kind of getting a little bit more swift with the editing, so I'm not gonna have it um, constantly up. I'm gonna switch in and out so that way we can converse and talk and get some things going on. But there are many passages in the Simon Necronomicon that reveal its purpose as a book of light. And there's one I'll share with you. Let me just pull this up to share my screen for a second. Okay, we're going back into an online copy of the Simon Tome. Let me pull this up right quick. Okay, so this is not where I want to go. Let me stop that screen share. That's going into the Zoom. Why would I want to do that? So let me go into another screen share. Sorry about that, people. And I don't know why it got captured there. I don't know why it keeps coming back into that. So let me check something. Give me 1 second. Sorry. Close this. Let me pull this up. And I think that should do it. Okay. I think we're back on track. Pull this up. Pull the share up. There we go. So you can see the screen here. Let me blow it up a little bit so that we can definitely get a little bit bigger words. No, it's not coming up. Okay, show that out right there. Okay, so here we go. So in the book of entrance, and this is something that we went over yesterday when we was talking about the Chaldean covenant and its meaning in part one of the Simon Necronomicon lessons. In part two, we're discussing is the Simon Necronomicon a book of light? And if you can follow the cursor, you can see here something I want to touch on. And for that reason was the covenant made, that none shall safely walk through the sunken valleys of the dead before having ascended to Marduk, nor shall they breach the gates that lie beyond the door until they seen the signs of the mad god and felt the fury of the hellish queen. Okay, so let me stop to share right there, which because that's a very interesting point. So basically, through the initiation in the Simon Necronomicon, they are given an advantage of two different realities or two different worlds or segments. One is the world of Kerr, the underworld, and also the starry realm, which is signified by the three sigils on uh, the Agamasaratu. You know what I'm saying? And so the Agasai, the Ara, the Aga, and the Bandar symbol, all those things signify three different realms. And those realms or principles are the principles existing in man. And this is further emphasized in the text introduction. Let me go back and I'm going to pull up another section. Give me 1 minute. And this, I know a little bit more frequently now, but this one is so. This one is right here. So let me go back into the share screen once again, and we'll get this all on board. Okay. There we go. And this is in the introduction section called The Goddess of the Witches. And clearly we see here, when we follow the cursor, but what of Inanna, the single planetary deity, having a female manifestation among the Sumerians? She was invoked in the Necronomicon and identified as the vanquisher of death, for she descended into the underworld and defeated her sister, the goddess of the abyss, Queen Ereshkigal, and possibly another name for Tiamat. And we'll discuss that in a second. Interestingly enough, the myth has many parallels with the Christian concept of Christ's death and resurrection, among which the crucifixion of Nana was impaled on a stake as a corpse. The 3 days in the Sumerian Hades and the eventual resurrection are outstanding example of how Sumerian mythology previewed the religion and perhaps as many as 3,000 years. A fact that beautifully illustrates the cosmic and eternal nature of this myth. Then it says, therefore, the goddess of the witches has two distinct forms. The ancient one, the goddess of the dragon-like Tutulic power, which is raised in magic rituals, and the elder goddess, the feeder of death, who bring the promise of resurrection and rejuvenation to her followers and those who must reside for a time after death between incarnations in what is called Sumaland. Okay. So on one end, we see that in order to understand the Necronomicon, we definitely have to understand its hierarchy, its pantheon. Because the Necronomicon has a distinct pantheon than that of Sumer. And I want to answer a question that was proposed today. Someone had asked me a question about the prayer to every god that's in the Oracle of Enheduanna, and now is in the advanced copies of the Transfiguration of Holy Inanna, which is a new book that was just released. That book will replace the Oracle of Enheduanna. So for those who don't have a copy of the Oracle of Enheduanna or want to collect it as a collector's item, I would advise you to purchase it before September 1st, when the Oracle of Enheduanna is retired. The book that we're replacing the Oracle of Enheduanna is the Transfiguration of Holy Inanna. It has about an additional an additional 150 pages, a total of about 299 pages. It's fully loaded, and it's all with original text. The artwork design is great inside, and it's pretty consistent. You know what I'm saying? So if you want to have the Oracle of Enheduan as a collection item, I would suggest that you order that before the close of the month, you know, just to make that clear. Uh, but in the process, what I was saying was that someone had asked me about the prayer to every god. The prayer to every god is, let me pull the screen back up, is slightly um, noted in the second testimony of the man Arab, but the full prayer is said for 7 days. And every time I do it, I'm reciting this full length Sumerian prayer, not the version that's in the Necronomicon, but the actual version. I'm drawn to the Necronomicon as, you know, what needs to be appeased. So I would say that the Simon tome is definitely a distinct system that includes uh, the premise of the Chaldean covenant, which we discussed yesterday. Okay, but as we saw in the video, I mean in the Necronomicon, the goddess of the witches is basically the goddess of the practitioner, the gatewalker, however people want to call it, and it has two distinct forms. It has one form that represents a chthonic energy, and then it has one form that is a starry energy. So that tells us something that's very deep about the Agama Saratu and the symbology. But it also unveils that the Simon tome, the Necronomicon, is a practice of balance between the rights of the chthonic world, the underworld, and the heavenly force that the deity, that the practitioner has access to. And there's a reason for that. And the reason being, I'm going to pull this up shortly, it has a lot to do with a historic account that happened quite some time ago. Let me just pull this up here. And it's not the page I want. Give me 1 second, I'm sorry. Let me just go back into here again. No, this is actually the same page, but the account is notarized in the um, Enuma Elish. That's the account that I'm speaking of, and that gives us a clear indication. Yeah, this is definitely what I want to tap into. Um, okay, so let me share my screen again, so everyone could see that this information is coming directly from the Simon Necronomicon itself. Let me post this up. Okay, here we go. Going to share. There we are, right here. Okay. So as we can see towards the bottom, we're looking at the last paragraph. And it says, there was a battle between forces of light and darkness, so called, that took place long before man was created, before even the cosmos as we know it existed. It is described fully in the Enuma Elish and in the bastardized version found in the Necronomicon, and involves the Ancient Ones, led by the serpent Mamu Tiamat and her male counterpart Apsu, against the elder gods called in such in the Necronomicon, led by the warrior Marduk and son of the sea god Enki, lord of magicians of this side, or what could be called white magicians, although close examination of the myth of ancient times makes one pause before attempting to judge which of the two warring factions was good or evil. Marduk won this battle in much the same way the later St. George and St. Michael would defeat the serpent again. The cosmos was created from the body of the slain serpent, and man was created from the blood of the slain commander of the ancient army, Kingu, thereby making man a descendant of the blood of the enemy as well as the breath of the elder gods. Okay, so in principle, man is a bifold creation because part of him comes from the earth, and the other part um, comes from the heavens, from the stars. He's infused with the breath of life, okay, which um, is very interesting. So, we can see that there's a work in the balance, but it's not um, in a sense to practice negativity, this balance, because some people will say uh, there's a sort of like philosophy going around now that in order to master the negative emotions that's contained in oneself, they should be invoked. And that's kind of interesting. Um, and it's something that I don't totally agree with, but it is kind of interesting because once you're aware that your emotional state creates your reality, it's probably best to attract, to entertain, and to host emotions that will lead to your greater good, will lead to your greater prosperity. You know what I'm saying? Attracting anger is only going to get you into a conflict, war, or a fight. You know what I'm saying? And in the pantheon of the Necronomicon, and it's emulating the pantheon of the Chaldeans, there are some energies that are associated with anger or whatever have you. And in the process of getting to know those energies, um, it'll definitely attract certain things to it. So you always want to make sure that you're balancing yourself out or having some daily practices that definitely lead to a good frame of mind and good thinking um, while you're doing the thing with the Necronomicon, which also, when you understand it, like I said, it's truly a book of light. And Simon comments about this in different occasions, where he calls the practitioner of the Necronomicon like a black Bodhisattva. And that's a really profound statement to say, you know. So I think that when you look at the covenant, when you look at the um, some of the um, guidelines for walking, some of the instructions from the Mad Arab, is always done to seek the greater good and the purpose of what the text was written for. So I think that's very important to maintain. When people try to utilize the stuff for just simple nonsense or whatever, or I'm going to do this, that, and the other, they don't really appreciate the value of the text when they try to turn it into something else, and they usually sidestep into whole fiasco of confusion. So the Necronomicon is a book that reflects our reality in the human condition of being from Earth and being from, having the starry influence inside of us. Now, what's interesting about all this is that we saw in one segment where Inanna uh, was crucified, Ishtar Inanna was crucified on the stake, and there's another reference to her um, rescuing, so to speak, her followers from Summerland. I want to bring that back up again. Hold on, because that was really profound. Because I want to touch on that on a deeper level, and that was in the section the Goddess of Witches. Let me just pull that back up again. And there's many other passages that really talk about the light that the book cast. Um, Let me go into sharing the screen because this is an important point that kind of coincides with our discussion the other day about the Chaldean covenant. Let me pull this up. Okay, give me 1 second. And we're going back into this section called the Goddess of the Witches. And you see here it says, therefore, The goddess of the witches has two distinct forms. The ancient one, the goddess of the dragon-like Truler power, which is raised in magical rituals. Okay. That tells us that the true power of Tiamat is raised in all rituals, and you can see it straight from the Watcher's ritual, the calling of the Watcher, where in the preliminary calling, it's really a prayer to the gods of the night. The normal calling, it mentions the sleep of Agur, which is the underworld beneath the mountains of Kur. That's the underworld. That's the dragon-like power. You know what I'm saying? So the dragon-like power is being raised during the calling of the Watcher. And there's a lot of stuff in here. You know what? Let's just go through this because there's a lot of meat in here, and we're going to go through. But I want to get on this section right here. So that's one part of it. And then it says, and the elder goddess defeateth of death, who brings the promise of resurrection and rejuvenation to her followers, those who must reside for a time after death between incarnations in what is called the Summerland. I just haven't heard too much discussion about this aspect for several reasons. Number one, a lot of people will promote in Sumerian thought, right, that the um, Necronomicon, let me take this off and share, that Sumerian mysticism and stuff like that, it relied on this idea that how can I say this in English? They relied on this idea that when you're dead, you're dead. That's it. You know what I'm saying? The first thing people point to is the Gilgamesh account. Like, that's it. They didn't believe in any glorious afterlife. They just believed that, you know, that was it. You was in this dark dreary place, and maybe if some of your relatives sent you some gifts or maybe some sacrifices to you, you can, you can live a little better, right? But however, that's not what the Necronomicon says. It says that there is a promise of rejuvenation and life, and actually another incarnation. So we have in the Necronomicon uh, the hope of reincarnation, the hope of after living or leaving the body, like the Madab said, his body is torn away. He says, I knew, don't forget about him. So he knew that there was other possibilities than going into this dark, dreary place. And now there's information coming out of Mesopotamia on an anthropological level, historical level, that illustrates that that was just, some people believe that. You know what I'm saying? It was put out there in the Gilgamesh epic when Gilgamesh was talking to Enkidu. However, there's other um, material that leads us to understand that, amongst that whole nation, there was probably some split understandings based on the cult of the deity. So let's go back into that. I want to touch on that a little bit further. Okay. In the share, there we go. And it says that who brings the promise of resurrection and rejuvenation to her followers, those who must reside for a time after death and between incarnations in what is called Sumerland. And this is something very important because Simon talks about this in Gates of the Necronomicon, the sort of like an instruction manual to the Simon Necronomicon. But none of this is ever really drawn up on a deeper level outside of what's written in some of the books where he talks about the development of the astral body. It's pretty apparent at this point that the word um, Ishtar means star. So Ishtar is the starry component, the consciousness that lives on when the spirit is torn from the body. Okay, so when you're reading about Ishtar and the Necronomicon, that's what you're talking about. So the fact that she's worshipped because she's conquered death. You see what I'm saying? The Necronomicon is a book about raising up that tutelar power. But in the vessel of Ishtar, who always worked towards the greater good of humanity, when the flood came, and Enlil wanted to wipe humanity out, and the Sumerian Noah would say it was Ishtar that was crying over the death of the humans. You know what I'm saying? She took the Medes from Enki to restore her city. So Ishtar was a warrior that worked towards the greater good. So in the practitioner of the Simon Necronomicon's mind, that is like one of the high examples of what it actually means to be a gatewalker, and she was the first gatewalker. So, in the same manner that we read in the Christian Bible, for those who practice Christianity or watching this video out of curiosity, that Christ said that his followers will do greater works than he has. You see what I'm saying? You can do greater works than Ishtar has, but you're still following the example the same way Christ said, pick up your torch and stake. You know what I'm saying? Pick up your cross. You know what I'm saying? So in our case, we're picking up the stake because Ishtar and Nana was crucified on the stake. And she's the example of that resurrection, that coming to life. And all those things, as far as like a rapture is concerned, all those Christian doctrines of a rapture and ruling with Christ, it all comes from Nana Ishtar's descent into another world. It's the same thing. And it's drawn up on so many different levels, from the change of winter into spring to um, a cycle of who's on earth and who isn't, to many other things. But that's truly like a remarkable thing, the fact that between incarnations there's this place called Summerland. You know what I'm saying? And it's echoed slightly in the teachings of the Mad Arab. You know what I'm saying? Because here's the thing. After the Mad Arab completes the book, let's just look in the book and see for ourselves. Let's just take a look and see what's going on. Let me just find the passage first. This will be real easy because it's really the last pages of the book. Um, as we go down here, okay, let me share my screen. Sorry about that. Okay. And this is the testimony of the Mad Arab part 2. And we look in the last part, it says, the stars grow dim in their place, and the moon pale before me, as though a veil were blown across its flame. Dog-faced demons approach the circumference of my sanctuary. Strange lines appear carved on my door and walls, and the light from the window grows increasingly dim. A wind has risen, the dark waters stir. This is the book of the servant of the gods. Okay, so um, that's very paramount because we can see the dark waters stir. And this is the same condition that happened in the case of Ishtar. Let's go back to this again, and I'm going to illustrate this in 1 second in the Magan text. So let's go to the Magan text, and as in this section, the 5th section of the sleep of Ishtar. uh, Let me just look this down right quick. Definitely got to get more on the navigation side with everything. Okay. Um, okay, so let me share this, and we're going to read this section, and you're going to see what's going on. go back into this. Okay, almost there. Here we go. And it says, demons of all the abyss lay there, dead but dreaming. They clung to the walls of the house of death. Faceless and terrible, the Anunnaki stared out. Blind and mad as Ektor reared up. The eye upon the throne opened. The dark waters stirred. See that? The dark waters stirred. So that's the indication of something. And it says that the gates of lapis lazuli glistened in the darkness. Unseen monsters spawned of the dust of all ages, spawned in the battle of Marduk, spawned in Heber with the sign of Heber, led by Kingu. With haste they fled through the palace of death, stopping only at the corpse of Ishtar. Okay, I'm going to go down a little bit further. Okay. And it says here, the dark waters trembled and rolled as Ektor screamed upon his throne. Cthulhu lurched forth from his sleep. Vishnugurab fled the palace of death. Ixachak trembled in fear and hate. The Anunnaki fled their thrones. The eye upon the throne took flight. Erishkigal roared and summoned Namtar. The magician Namtar she called, but not for pursuit, but for protection. And Nana ascended from the underworld. So, in some cases, um, when you look at our reality, man doesn't know why he's here. It's a place of ignorance. And in some ways, depending on where you're going, we know in the Chaldean covenant, we're going to the stars. So this duality is definitely sort of like a semi underworld existence. But you'll notice that the Mad Arab experienced the same thing when the dark water stirred. And let me just say this so that it's very clear. When you look into the context of how the myth of Inanna Ishtar's descent into the netherworld, how it was received by the ancients, specifically the ancient Chaldeans, it was received as a glimmer of hope. Because when, as we saw in the Epic of Gilgamesh, when a person passes, when the body returns to the ground, the um, the underworld definitely would try to claim an individual. But if they put, their time and faith in Enki, the father Enki, as it mentions in the Simon Necronomicon, then the father Enki will resurrect and he'll pull them out of that condition. So they looked at it more like a hope, like, wow, something happens, I'm worshiping Enki, I'm gonna get pulled out of this. And so when the Mad Arab finished this book, he said, this is the book of the servant of the gods, because it's supposed to be utilized for the greater good. And in Gates of the Necronomicon, it was a book that was utilized to protect the planet from negative forces. And for that service, that you prove yourself on earth, and this is also part of the Chaldean covenant, because remember yesterday we discussed in the Chaldean covenant that a person couldn't access the realms mentioned of the Igigi or even Ganzir unless they mastered their inner demons. So that's not something that a treacherous text would lend itself to, but it's definitely something that a book of light would lend itself to. But see, here's the problem. A lot of times, especially in New Age community and modern thought, modern, you know, thinking on spirituality, they want a person to just totally ignore the side of the flesh. You know what I'm saying? And it's not saying that the darkest desires should be honored. It's just saying that there is a certain dragon current or energy or power, if you will, that could boost goodwill, that could boost proper, prosperous thinking. The thing about it is that the energy is raw energy. See what I'm saying? So it's really going to go into where a person's thought process is, and there's still some safety traps. The traps in the Necronomicon he mentions are to protect the uh, user. There are many traps. There are a lot of traps in the book, and um, they're to protect the user. I have to testify to that. How so? Because if you're dealing with raw energy and anything that comes to your mind could happen, you can get angry at somebody and it can cause their demise very quickly. And that may not be a good look. It could be a loved one, things of that nature. You could, um, reach out and really mess somebody up that you just don't want to do that, or even your own self. You can have thoughts or worries and things of that nature that are not good for your own well being. So that's why the traps are put into the book, so the person doesn't access the total raw energy. And that those methods can't really even be obtained if a person has a certain mindset. You know what I'm saying? Which is one of the even best protections of all. You know what I'm saying? So it is definitely a truly righteous book. I'm gonna I want to go into one more segment before we close it up. Um, Let me pull this up a second. Okay. I want to go to the ceremonies, the Book of Calling. Let's go there. And okay, let's go into this. And we're going to go into the first seven. Okay. I'm going to share my screen again. And we're going to the first seven. Okay. Here we go. Okay. So as we can see in the beginning, the calling definitely draws up the dragon power of Tiamat. Now, why did it say in the introduction of the Simon tome that Erishkigal was probably another name for Tiamat? For several reasons. First, Tiamat was put into a gate, and that gate was like the gate of Ganzir. That should make sense, obviously. But the second reason is probably a little bit more intricate in the sense that Erishkigal was married to the Great Watcher, Nergal. Nergal, his name means the Great Watcher. And when you look at Nergal, he's often depicted as a lion. And when you think about the Watcher and the three Great Watchers that talks about in the Book of the Watcher, you're talking about the Giza necropolis of the Sphinx and the pyramids. So, Nergal is one who had access to the netherworld. He ruled it, and he had access to the starry heavens. So a lot of the imagery of the priest of the flame and the sword, as it talks about in the Book of Calling, that's Nagal. You know what I'm saying? That's Nagal. And some of the imagery on even some of the garments that the priest should wear outside of the um, crown of Anu, but when you look at the front of the calling, it has certain symbology that is associated with Nagal and the planet Mars, you know. So that's definitely a given. The Book of Kuta, Nagal ruled Kuta. You know what I'm saying? So when you look at the Book of Calling, it should reflect a priest that has ties with Kuta, a priest who has ties with the realm of Erishkigal. So when the book opens, it says, "This is the book of the ceremonies of calling, handed down in since the time of the elder gods." The elder gods walked earth, conquers the ancient ones. So the elder gods were living alchemists. that were able to ascend through the technology that they're giving us. And we can see the names, the book of Azag, this is the book of Agura, the Dark Waters of Apsu, the realm of Erishkigal. This is a book, like, really, that's dealing with that realm. This is Nagal's book, right? Does that not make it a book of light? Of course, it's a book of light because how is that energy used? Well, when we read 7, know first that the power of the conquerors is the power of magic, and that the stricken gods will ever tempt thee away from the legions of the mighty, that you will feel the subtle fluids of the body moving to the breath of Tiamat and the blood of Kingu, who race in your veins. Be ever watchful, therefore, not to open the gate, or if thou needs, put a time for its closing before the rising of the sun and seal it, or else you be left as an agent of chaos. Okay, that's very righteous. It's not telling us to entertain the dragon force constantly because it says not to open the gate. Be watchful, therefore, not to open the gate. So you don't want to constantly do certain things from the text. You may have other exercises that you engage in to help train your body and mind because that's really what the technology is for. And I'm going to say something about these 7 principles that appear into the, you know, to in the book of calling is that they also reinforce or affirm the transformations given by the 7 gate deities. So when you see no first, that's Nana. And you can see that the moon's influence is going to cause the blood of Kingu to race in your veins. So that's Nana's influence. The second, no, secondly, is that the power of magic is the power of our master Enki. Now, Enki, a lot of people don't know this. In the Sumerian pantheon, Enki was actually assigned to Mercury. He was a mercurial god. You can look it up online. He became associated with the Igigi in later periods. Right? So to see this, know secondly, that's Nebo, Lord of the Seas and Master Magicians, fashioner of the magic name, the magic number, the magic wand. That's all scribe stuff. Nebo is the ruler of scribes. And this is telling you what you get from Nebo and how to use it best. Right? And it also says, know therefore the priests who govern the works of fire and the god of fire, Gishbar Gilbil. So we know that of what Nagal's relationship was with the god of fire. You know, so what it's saying is that the technology that's in the net is definitely coming from Kuta's perspective, which is the realm that Nagal ruled. He ruled the city of Kuta. That was his right. So that's why even his number is distinctly different than the other deities. And there's a whole conversation that could be had on that. But the idea is that when you understand Nagal's, deal, then you can understand why the energy of the neck is the way it is. It does have like a little bit of a shadowy, you know, um, uh, aesthetic. However, it's not to deal like evil, it's to use for the greater good. Know thirdly, which is Ishtar, that by the power of the elders and the submission of the ancient ones, thou mayest procure every honor, dignity, wealth, and happiness. That's very Taurian. That's very Venusian, right? And the fact that Inanna Ishtar, she was able to conquer the netherworld. So it's dealing with the submission of the ancient ones. Okay. Um, then we're dealing with um, therefore the obligation is as a gatekeeper of the inside, the angel of Marduk, servant of Enki for the gods forgetful and very far away. Okay. And it was to the priest of the flame that covenant was given to seal the gate between the worlds, between this one and the other. Okay. So we'll get into that fully in another conversation because that's going to take some time to break down. No, fourthly, this is become the obligation of the priests of the flame and the sword and of all magic to bring the power to the underworld and to keep it chained thereby. That's the role of Shamash. Okay. When he's making his journey every day to the underworld, for surely the underworld is the gate forgotten. And it goes on, and you can see that. No, fifthly, um, that the worshippers of Tiamat are abroad, the worshippers of Tiamat. So now we're dealing with the worshippers who worship Ker, which is ruled by Nagal, which is the fifth gate, right? It says, are abroad in the world and will give fight to the magician. Nagal is the rule of war, it's the rule of combat. Okay, so that's interesting. And then we go into um, no, sixthly, that thou shalt not seek the operations of magic save by the rules and government set down herein. So that's Marduk. Jupiter deals with philosophy, government, you know what I'm saying? Stuff like that. So in certain respects, you know what I mean? So that's um, the Marduk gate. And those severally, of course, is a door which deals with matters of necromancy and stuff. And you read it, said, no severally of these things thou art to expect the commission of the most sacred magic. Study the symbols well, and do not be afraid of the awful specters that thou shalt invade thy operations or haunt thine inhabitants by day or by night. Only charge them with the words of the covenant, and they will do as you ask. Thou be strong. So it goes on to say, if thou perform these operations often, thou shalt see things becoming dark, and the wanderers in their space should no more be seen by thee. So that the individual, those influences, as we discussed yesterday, won't take paramount in the person's life, and that his outer light will shine forward. See what I'm saying? So it's definitely like a book of light. Everything it says in this book is straight up. Let me stop sharing. Some people will go on and say, hey man, well, what about a lot of the criticisms? Wasn't this a hoax? And people trying to do this to make a whole bunch of money and all this other crazy stuff that really don't make sense. And there's a simple explanation to all of that that is in the tome itself. I'm gonna definitely try to pull it up. And it's in the first paragraph. Um, Let me get a screenshot of this, and we're gonna close it down shortly after that. Okay. And this is in the section, the mythos and the magic. And it says, we can probably compare the essence of most of Lovecraft's short stories with the basic themes of Crowley. Unique system of ceremonial magic. Let me just close this up. Which the latter was a sophisticated psychological structure intended to bring the initiate into contact with the higher self via the process of individualism that is active and dynamic, being brought about by the patient himself, as opposed to the passive depth of analysis of Jungian adepts. Lovecraft's Cthulhu Mythos was meant for entertainment. That's it. His Cthulhu Mythos was meant for entertainment. So these people are like, oh man, they came out with a hoax and whatever. It mentions that the Lovecraft aspect, the Cthulhu Mythos, was meant for entertainment. It wasn't meant to take seriously as a way to alchemate oneself, but to draw um, like correspondences in art in comparison to alchemy. And the reason why is because art actually rose at a higher spiritual vibration than religion. People will debate over religion, they'll hate each other because of religion. Art doesn't produce that. Art is manifesting itself at a higher vibration. And it says on the last sentence of this first paragraph, it says, scholars, of course, are able to find higher ulterior motives of Lovecraft's writing as can be done with any manifestation of art. So you learn what the traps are by just throwing the Lovecraft stuff out. You see what I'm saying? And that's the main, key to all of this. Let me just stop sharing the screen. Is to be able to separate the wheat from the chaff, as it says in the introduction. Sometimes, you can explain 1,000 pages in one symbol. And so that's what the art of fiction does, like in a grimoire or in a text that's considered to be magical, is it gives the practitioner a way to see multiple or boundless information in just a simple line or in a simple analogy of fiction. And since fiction is not judged on the criteria that religious dogma is, it allows a true practitioner to pursue certain things from, seeing the relevance of the material or the fictional stories as an analogy for certain things going on in this world. You know what I mean? And that's what that's really about. It's not about, like, oh man, these dudes, they believe that Lovecraft, that's not what this is about. There is the Necronomicon that's mentioned in the fictional stories of Lovecraft. And it says in the Simon Necronomicon that all of that is strictly for entertainment. But analogies can be drawn. And I mentioned this on an Nzulu page that people always talk about this thing with Lovecraft and the Simon Tone, but they really don't have anything to do with each other. You know what I'm saying? The main thing to understand is this: scientists have taken over 80 words from the fictional world, from things that appear in fiction, and have used them to describe modern day scientific phenomena. Look into the origin of the word robots, right? Robots is something very real right now. You know what I'm saying? But the word comes from a fiction term. Do we have fans of that fiction writer attacking the scientific community? Oh, you shouldn't, that's not real. That guy, he was just writing books. So we're practicing a science and we're using a fictional term the same way academic, scientists do. They pull terms out of fictional books and apply them to real life sciences. You see what I'm saying? Because the stories may actually illustrate certain real principles. And this is what goes on here. So finally, I want to pull uh, just one more quote up. Let me just put this to the side and see. Let me get this on here. Da, 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 da. Okay, it's not coming through there. So let me take a look at something else here. But I thought I can end it off. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to find this aspect of it, but I really wanted to get into a little bit more about this gnosis. And I know exactly how I finish this up. I'm going to finish this up to illustrate that the Simon Necronomicon is a book of light. We're going to go to the section in its introduction titled The Devil, and that's going to reveal that it's actually a book of light. And it says in this, and I read this yesterday, it's one of my favorite quotes. I love going into this section. When I was like working every day with, text or whatever, a newborn, as you will, I used to love to read this section. It was just totally blew me away by how it was worded and everything. And I'm gonna do a screen share on that. Let me pull this up and we're going back in. Okay. And you can see my screen. And it says right in the paragraph, Nexilaz, it says man's power to alternate the nature of his environment must develop simultaneously with his ability to master his inner environment, his own mind, his psyche, soul, spirit. Okay, and so this is what the Necronomicon is about. It's, light people associate with good, but light can also be deceptive. So um, I would say that the Necronomicon is a book for the good. I wouldn't necessarily say it's a book of light because that could be debatable as far as like, what light is. But I think most people they define light as um, something that is very promotes morality, right? And the Necronomicon does that in all of its rules and everything. It always promotes the best outcome. Well, what can happen is this is where the problem comes in, and it was something that Gurdjieff have said in his readings. I think it's written in the book. Let me stop sharing this. I don't know if I have this book. It'd be great to look it up together, read it together. It's a book by Gurdjieff called In Search of the Miraculous. And let me see if I could actually find this. Um, may not be able to, but it really gives an excellent point about what really makes what's really the definition of someone in the dark arts and why the Necronomicon, how a person can actually stumble into that. Let's just be real with it, really get into the subject. Um, Let me see if I can pull this up. I think I got it. Let me see. I think this is it right here. Okay. I'm gonna see if I can do a word find. Let me just blow it up a bit. Okay, there we go. Let me go to find. Okay, so this is going to be amazing. We can share this read together. And okay, it's one of my favorite quotes from In Search of the Miraculous. And I may have said it or used it before on the blog page, and we're going to talk about it right now. Let me just share my screen, and after this, we're going to close up. Okay. And let me see. Here we go. Let me go to screen share. And you can see. And this is Gurdjieff. I think Ouspensky had asked a question to Gurdjieff. And he had asked him several times about black magic and what that is and how does that relate to the work. This is what he says. He says, all that has been said up to now refers to real groups connected to real concrete work, which in its turn is connected with what has been called the fourth way. But there are many uh, imitation ways, imitation groups, and imitation work. These are not even black magic. Okay. He says you have groups that imitate something. That's why I said, in order to understand Simon Necronomicon yesterday, you should accept it as it is and get to know it as if you're getting to know someone that you're interested in. He says questions have often been asked at these lectures as to what is black magic, and I have replied that there is neither red, green, nor yellow magic. There is mechanics. That is what happens. There is doing. Doing is magic, and doing can only be of one kind. There cannot be two kinds of doing, but there can be a falsification, an imitation of the outward appearance of doing, which cannot give objective results. He goes on to say that, um, let me go down to the second paragraph. He said, this is why, in true work, that is, in true doing, the producing of infatuation in people is not allowed, right? And that's something that actually Simon is noted as saying. he said like a lot of times people have asked him to start groups, and he was like, "Nah, I don't want to get into that because that's just going to promote hero worship." So it's interesting. He already had that perspective, and we read about it in the book that was even before its time, but it's really interesting to see the continuity. And it says, what you call black magic is based on infatuation and on playing upon human weaknesses. Black magic does not in any way mean magic of evil. I've already said earlier that no one ever does evil for the sake of evil, in interest of evil. Everyone always does everything in the interest of good as he understands it. The same way it is quite wrong to assert that black magic must necessarily be egotistical, that in black magic a man strives for some results for himself. This is quite wrong. Black magic may be quite altruistic, may strive after the good of humanity or after the salvation of humanity from real or imaginary evils. But what can be called black magic has always one definite characteristic. This characteristic is the tendency to use people for some, even the best of aims, without their knowledge and understanding, either by producing in them faith and infatuation or acting upon them in fear. But it must be remembered in this connection that a black magician, whether good or evil, has at all events been at a school. He has learned something, has heard something, knows something. He is simply a half educated man who has either been turned out of a school or who has himself left a school having decided that he already knows enough, that he does not want to be in subordination any longer, and that he can work independently and even direct the work of others. Okay, so let's get into that for 1 second. Why is that? Why did Gurdjieff say that that was the characteristic of a black magician? Because they don't know the full scope of the work that they are being educated in. It's like if there's a young man who's an electrician, he goes to school, he's learning about the law of how electrician works, how electricity works. And he stops the schooling 6 months and he's like, oh man, I could do this himself. Now he may have been somebody who could do a couple of things even before he got into school. He may have been able to fix a switchboard, just different stuff like that. However, somewhere down the line, because of not having a full education. Now he can also educate himself, right? I think that that's an important feature. People can educate themselves to a certain degree, right? Um, but if they don't like have that, they can misunderstand certain ideas and perceive them for others. And we see this a lot in communities that think that they're conscious. They take ideas, they take a piece of a history, they don't know the whole scope, they don't know how to deal with linguistics. A perfect example, we're talking about Sumeria. A perfect example of this is Zechariah Sitchin. Here's a guy that people say, oh man, this dude's a scientist. Then you go to his Wikipedia page and you find out that he wasn't a scientist. He never been to school for anything Sumerian. Never. Right? He was a guy who was a manager at a shipping warehouse. He believed in this dude, um, the guy that wrote that book, Fingerprints of the Gods. And they had this mentality of like this alien stuff. So here's this problem with Sumeria. And this is why a Necronomicon is also needed. Because Sumeria is one of the oldest civilizations in the world. And in some ways, there's always this debate about Egypt and Sumer. But I do know one thing is that Mesopotamia had a concept of the number zero. Egypt didn't, right? So, however you want to take that, that's just however it is. The other thing is that people, because Sumeria is so old, in order for them to fit their view of how the world started, they have to make it fit Samaria. So that's what Zechariah Sitchin is all about. And then he's a biblical guy. So when you read about the Sumerians, why they left, he attributes it to Yahweh, which These texts has nothing to do with Yahweh. So I was done with him. And his theories are wrong. His wordology is wrong because he never learned linguistics properly. All he learned was to take a book off, like a Sumerian dictionary. This means this means this means this. And then he goes around saying this means this, but he don't know that certain words, the meaning of them change depending on the word before and after. So he comes up with this idea about this planet Nibiru. It's a planet that goes around the sun every 3,600 years. And we already know that the reason for 3,600, we explained in the video of the Simon Necronomicon lessons part 1. So this has nothing to do with this planet. It doesn't even exist. Why doesn't it exist? Because the Akkadians, who succeeded the Sumerians, they had their own thesauruses and dictionaries. And in their thesauruses and dictionaries, they clearly indicate that Nibiru was another name for Jupiter and also another um, astronomical aspect. It had nothing to do with this. This is stuff that this dude invents, and then he takes the information, he takes bits and pieces. And if you don't know the full accounts, you'd be like, man, that sounds like that makes pretty much sense. And going all into this stuff. You see what I'm saying? That's the example of a black magician, someone who doesn't get the full education and take what they know, which is actually misinformation, and promotes that. They promote misinformation. You see what I'm saying? That becomes, and so they can do it for altruistic reasons. Like, hey man, we're doing this. They can even have a desire, but like Gurdjieff says, one thing distinct, that the people are still kept ignorant. You know what I'm saying? They don't have a choice because they're relying on someone's word. You know what I'm saying? That is not really backed up by anything. You see? So this is where the real devilshment comes in because it creates this world that we see today of chaos, where there's half truths being told. And, you know, basically now the only thing you can do is like, yo, if you ain't around it, don't even really speak on it like that. Like you can give your opinion about anyone can give an opinion about something, but don't really get too animated about stuff that you haven't been able to tap into that world to see it for what it is. You know what I'm saying? And the beauty about the Necronomicon tradition and the Necronomicon and so forth is that in the training of it, those energies will also teach the individual. So you get a chance to be taught directly in this secret society, in this school, directly by those energies. You see what I'm saying? And also, a person does need assistance in walking. You see what I'm saying? But I liken the tradition to sort of like groups that believe that each one teach one. That once you get to receiving your crown of Anu, then you can navigate as you need to. You see what I'm saying? Because everyone has their own orbit and they may have to experience things that you may find conflicting, but at least on the truth, it's agreeable. And from that, you can draw wisdom. When I was openly teaching the initiation that's found in Necronomicon, I can have a student in Japan, I can have a student in Africa, and a student in Brazil. And they will all give me the same responses about the gates because they were real. So they can tell me Ishtar is like this. And it's almost like describing a person in common that we all know. That's how real it was. You know what I'm saying? And that's a beautiful thing. So being able to utilize the dragon current for the highest aims is one of the most beautifulest things in the world. And it's definitely, something that's ingenious. In the close of this discussion, just like the Mad Arab, you have people, the Mad Arab visited many schools. Like I said, he summoned in the testimony of the Mad Arab part 1, he summoned the God. So he had a foundation with the Dingir, the gods of the Sumerian pantheon. But he also was tutored under other energies to get a fuller picture. And I think like when a person's going through the seven, especially the first time, they should just focus on that, not too much anything wayward. If they have a daytime religion, just stick with those two things or whatever. And then after they grow, they can expand and learn under different schools. Some people, like, they try to make nah, I don't, whatever they try to make it Sumerian, but it really isn't Sumerian in the context that what people think it is, but the foundation is there. The Chaldean covenant there. That's an old covenant that historically comes out of Mesopotamia. But I'm gonna say this, like, there were some things I learned in other schools that kind of bleed into our discussion. Um, One of them people may know, like in the school of Shinto, what I learned was there was these different dragon deities, and they perfectly aligned with the gate energies in the neck. So I was like, wow. So the color of one was white, that was Venusian. Another one was gold, that was Shamash. But they were dragons. And so the definitions of the dragons in Shinto was something that was like clouds. Like they wasn't the main gods. They were just like the mediators, you know what I'm saying? But they operated on a more lower level, but you can procure practical things from them. In the neck, the, the gate deities are a more higher form of gods. But one thing I did learn is that there were 8 dragon gods. 7 of them were identical in color to the gate deities. This is a very old system that precedes the publishing of the Simon Necronomicon in like 2,000, 2,500 years. So it was really fascinating to see, right? Because a lot of people don't have, insight into like Eastern sciences. But anyway, outside of the 7, there was a black dragon. Like, some people heard the Black Dragon Society and stuff like that. And anywhere in Eastern teachings, black is considered the defender. So when you look at like the Black Dragon Society, it has a certain purpose to defend a certain philosophy or something. And so the black dragon is utilized to protect one against black magic and other things. So when you look at the Necronomicon, one of its main energies is Kufa. It's the book of Kufa. That's the book of the deity that rules Kufa, which is Nagao. You see what I'm saying? So Nagao definitely is a god of war, god of pestilences, but there's a lot of beautiful things about Nagao also. You know what I'm saying? And that's really one of the heavy, heavy underlying forces. So the whole planetary realm, the heavenly realm, the realm of the underworld, all that is from the perspective of someone who's a devotee to Nagao. You know what I mean? But that doesn't mean because Nagao was a chthonic energy in some regards, and he was also associated with um, the planet Mars, that that's an evil energy. That was a truly benevolent energy. He was called the son of Ishtar. Nagao was called the son of Ishtar. He was able to procure, um, he was able to protect his followers against black magic. You see what I'm saying? He fought against that heavily. So, yes, the Simon, Necronomicon by Simon, is a book of light. And there'll be further discussions about that in the future. I definitely want to, share that information with you today. And we'll move on to lesson 3 shortly. This is me, Sal Bay, aka Warlock Asylum, saying have a good night, and we'll talk again soon.